stood on the pier and cried, wiping the tears from your eyes, waving your last goodbyes as the sails unfurled. Farewell, my home and friends.
Now folks, here we are. We're at the third and final part of the story on the shipwreck of the Wild Deer, and tonight we are talking about Willie Watson. How did life turn out for him? But before we get to that, one day I was coming through Portavogie a few days ago there just actually, and a fella says to me, there's an old walking stick in my house, and he said it belonged to my great grandmother and it was handed down to his grandmother then, and then his mother. So he said the stick was given to his great grandmother by a survivor of the shipwreck who was lodging in her house after the shipwreck. So this is the actual stick here. It's a bone top on it and a little silver tab around it here, and there was a silver end on it as well. But as children, the boyos wrecked the silver end on it. But here it is, a very nice little stick. So, I reckon, I know it's just handed down the story and word of mouth, but it all ties in, and it's in the proper timeline. His great-grandmother, 1880s, would have been alive and living in Portavogie at that point in time, and that's when the Wild Deer was shipwrecked, 1883. So that's a lovely little story, and this is the actual stick. So if you find any more things, folk, let me know down below in your comments. Make a comment and we'll add that in later on. The story of Willie Watson's life. After the shipwreck, Willie made his way back home, up through Belfast and back across to Scotland to his parish of Dalsurf where he lived. And he made his way up to the little farm, and if you look at the top right of your picture, you'll see a little lane winding up to a wee farm, the top right corner, top of the hill. That was Willie's home farm where he was raised, and his folks still farmed that farm. So Willie was not to be deterred. He booked a passage on a steamship out to New Zealand, and he travelled on that, and arriving there he worked with what was called the Australia and New Zealand Land Company for a short time, and it was set up actually and registered in Scotland with these group of boyos we're looking at here in 1877, I think, from memory. And they bought land in Australia, also in New Zealand. Now, they owned something like 1.2 million acres in Australia and 186,000 acres in New Zealand, or somewhere around that anyway. So Willie worked for them for a while. And then he was living with his brother, who lived down at Meadowbank Farm. And then Willie met his wife, who was called Agnes. And that's Agnes feeding her hens there. And they set up life together in their own farm, which was a little weatherboard house, lovely place in what he called Mayfield. So, and there's a picture of Willie and his wife Agnes heading off to church, which was a little Presbyterian church down the road. So that was how Willie started out. He was not to be deterred. He was an amazing man. So Willie went down with it to his brother. I think James was his brother's name. And he lived there, then married Agnes, then moved to Mayfield Farm, to his new house and home, and started an industrious work there. He actually had dairy cows and a dairy farm, and he actually was a shareholder in a co-op, a dairy co-op. If you're farmers, you'll understand this bill. And he worked at that, and he had another brother at home in the little farm up on the hill, and he had pleaded with him to come out, but he wouldn't come out. But Willie made him an offer he couldn't refuse, and that offer was a 200-acre plot and a new house on it. So the brother came out, and he supplied milk into the co-op thing, which Willie was part of and a big shareholder in. Now that just lasted for a few years, because at that point in time there was more money to be made in cropping and beef and sheep. So Willie ventured out then from the dairy start that he had with the co-op. He then started to farm, arable farming, tillage and sheep, which was much more profitable at that point in time. And so that's the way they went. And he farmed in a group with his relatives, all in close proximity. And there's a photograph there of Willie on his horse. And you can see it's a beautiful horse. And he's heading off to gather the sheep. His cart with the bales of wool on it. And that is heading off to the railway station some miles down the road. And it was the bales of wool were loaded onto there and went to the wool market. Then we see Willie's flock of sheep. This is a divvied up, touched up painting on a new era of photography that came in. I forget the name of it, but anyway, that's Willie's flock round Mayfield, his home farm. Here we are. Now Willie is in the yard at home. That's him in the barn standing, and that's James's brother on the right with those beautiful draft horses. And you'll look in the background and you'll see an International Titan tractor. The International's in there. So this is the era when working with horses and machinery was starting to emerge on scene, and that's a sort of a changeover. And Willie was a very go-ahead farmer. So he had actually came over back home to Scotland on a little visit, and he was actually down in South England, around London, some of the agricultural shows, looking at a tractor. So he didn't like the tractor in the picture here because there wasn't enough power in her. So, and we're going to see some more photographs of his horsepower and of the machines. And he was trialing everything. He was trying different seeds, different processes, top dressing as they call it in New Zealand, or what we call fertilizers, and improving the ground. When Willie went out at the start, the ground was poor, and some of the original settlers and travellers by sea had brought rabbits, and they had got out and got wild, and there was millions of rabbits in the countryside, and they ate everything and cleared everything, devastated everything. So all that land that Willie had to be fenced, it had to be drained, and improved topsoil, or dressing on the topsoil, ploughed in, and he was a go-ahead man. He was down every avenue, machinery. He was one of the first farmers to have the whole farm mechanised with machinery. So that's the sort of guy Willie was, a real go-ahead man. There's a photograph of his brother and the draft horses there, and look at the condition of those horses. Look at the muscles on their forequarters and their hindquarters. Amazing, beautiful animals. And the binder shot here is showing that Willie's two brothers. Now, this is a beautiful big field, and look at these horses ploughing here. I reckon there's 6 horses in that. Is that not amazing? Pulling that disc plough there. Beautiful. And there's another shot of a plough on with 4 horses pulling it. So he had lovely livestock, he had lovely horses, he did everything to the best of his ability. Now, where do you see this shot here of the horses pulling a mole drainer, or what I would call a mole drainer? They're making drains and draining areas. And it's a wee bit out of focus, but for the time ago that it was taken, it's amazing. Look at the team of horses on that. It must have been a hard pull. So at this stage, Willie was trialling different tractors on the farm, and we're going to take a little look at some of those pictures here now. And this is the era when machinery takes over his farm and the horses are put out to grass, so to speak. So this is Willie back at Milefield Farm again, and they're demonstrating this tractor here. I think that's International Titan, I'm not quite sure. And anyway, look at the number of furrows she's pulling. And I actually turned the old photograph over, and you know what it said the driver's name was? Davy McGill. There's the boyos, they're all out in the field threshing, that nice stack behind them there. And it's smoko time, as you would say in Australia or New Zealand. And there's Agnes at the back. She's patting the horse there, I think. At the back of the men there, she had brought lunch down for them. And there's a lovely shot too of that stack being threshed. And I think, if I can remember correctly, that stack yielded 200 bags of grain. And I'm not quite sure again what that is. It's too hard for me to make out. It's either grass seed or corn or barley. And here's another bit of a competition going on. Willie was this little tractor on the left. I forget what you call them, but it was being demonstrated against a horse plough. And that's Willie over at the far side there. And the man with his finger up in the air, he is a reporter from one of the local newspaper gazettes. So they're doing a trial here. Great set of spade lugs there. And of course at this stage, as well as machinery coming, motor vehicles were coming as well, and Willie bought this Buick. And this is at the Mayfield farm. And this is a workman, and Willie is on the left. And this is Willie in the Buick, and Agnes with him, and a little nephew or niece. And would you believe it, Agnes is at the wheel of this machine. Now, Willie was years ahead of his time. And this slide we're looking at here, Willie is at the equivalent of our Balmoral show. It's Dunedin, the equivalent of our Royal Agricultural show up in Belfast. And he's standing behind his plots here. He was tilling his ground, fertilising it, using different seeds and in the pasture land and for growing, cropping as well. So he had a stand at the show, and that is displaying all the types of seed that he has used and what fertiliser he has put on. It's an analysis, really. And he was a go-ahead man there, and that's him in the late 1920s, and Agnes, his wife, on his left. I'm not sure who the other man is. So in 1931, then Willie passed away at the age of 71, and Agnes, his wife, passed away the year after. And they hadn't any family. So, and there's the monument to Willie Watson from the Shipwreck of the Wild Deer. So a fantastic journey through life for Willie, and what an amazing man. Now there you are, folks. Again, that's about the end of the story of Willie Watson and the Shipwreck of the Wild Deer, and what an amazing trip through life he had. And He has another relative living in New Zealand, in Dunedin, and his name is Donald Cochrane. Now, Donald is an amazing man, and I think he has a lot of genes that were in Willie Watson, because his blog site, which is called The Lothians, is amazing. He is articulate and everything that I am not. So I'm rather at the agricultural end of things. So I'm putting his particulars down below the video here. You'll click on them and that'll take you into Donald's blog site. He covers a whole range of things. But if you go to the wild deer one, that will go through Willie's story. And he gave me permission to use photographs and stuff here that we have seen tonight. So thank you very much indeed, Donald. Lovely. Thank you.
Now, just like Willie's amazing journey, I'm on one through life as well. And here's my ticket. In the sweet by and by, we will meet on that beautiful shore. In the sweet by